remembrance oration of K. Sivaganathan, which is jointly organized by APB and the Sivaganathan Trust. And we welcome you all today. And we have an eminent speaker today, Dr. W.A.D. Vijayawardena, to talk to you on the economic turnaround in the new normal. So which is a really challenging time in the post-COVID area. And we'll start proceedings with the APB anthem. Tusita, you could play the APB anthem, please.
We are committed. Since 1988, we stand united. Our loyalty is with integrity to what is best for our community. We are the members of the APB,
serving all who are in our society.
Be they wealthy, be they meek,
What's best for them we'll see.
standing firm for all that we should be. We do what's good for banking governance. Learn the rules and give them prominence. Let's make sure of what is truly right. Then we'd be the trusted light. We are the members of the APB, serving all who are in our society.
Onwards to the future.
We do ascend with challenges and tests. We shall contend by building on the strength we uphold. With bad course ethics, we'll be bold. Empowering professionals, we are committed. Since 1988, we stand united. We stand united.
Thank you, Tusita. With this, we shall start the proceedings, formal proceedings. I invite our President, Aruna Fernando, to welcome our distinguished guests as well as the keynote delivery speaker. Over to you, Aruna, for the proceedings.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jeremy. Very good evening to all of you, and greetings to all on the occasion of Mahasivaratri. May Lord Shiva shower on you his blessings for happiness, prosperity, and peace in the coming year. On this holy day, we have another noble task, that is to celebrate the life of late Mr. K. Sivaganathan. So on behalf of the Council of the Association of Professional Bankers Sri Lanka, let me formally welcome all of you for today's memorial oration. Mr. K. Sivaganathan he was a well-known banker locally and internationally. He had a long stint at the Bank of Ceylon, the premier bank in this country, and he functioned as the senior deputy general manager and sometimes as the acting general manager as well. And he sort of led the digitalization efforts at the Bank of Ceylon, and he laid the foundation for Bank of Ceylon to become one of the major banks in the country today. So he retired from his service at the Bank of Ceylon in 1995 and later joined the Janashakti Insurance as its managing director and chief executive officer. And later in 1998, Mr. Sivaganathan was appointed as the advisor to the central bank's governor on banking and finance. So till his death, he functioned in that capacity. Talking about his role in APB, I'm actually very happy that he had been one of the founder members of the association. And he continued to remain there. And in 1995, 1996, he functioned as the APB's president. And I remember him very well because that was the year in which I also joined APB as a member. And APB used to have evening presentations at the Bank of Ceylon City office branch, which is located next to the Sri Lanka Telecom building in Fort. And I remember we had to climb the steps, and the auditorium is located on the first floor there. And at the top of the steps, Mr. Sivaganathan was there as the president, and he was welcoming all of us into the auditorium. He was clad in his usual white attire. So he was a very friendly individual, very humble, though he was functioning at a very high level at the Bank of Ceylon at that time. And thanks to his efforts, I think APB also had a very strong foundation. And we have grown today to become a large organization. We are having about 2,000 members, and we are in the process of getting ourselves incorporated as a legal body through an act of parliament. And in the near future, we are going to have some other arrangements also for the benefit of our members. So that is something that wherever he is, Mrs. Sivaganathan can be very proud of those contributions. So he actually was not devoted, he had not devoted his time only for work and social work. He was very much a family man as well. And he had a very loving family, and Dr. Arul and Nathan and his wife were well looked after by him. That was the very reason after Mr. Sivaganathan's death, they formed this trust to honor his wishes and carried on with these memorial orations. So today we are having the 19th memorial oration on the theme Economy Downturn in the New Normal. And to talk on the subject, we have another strong banker, one of my gurus also in late 80s, Dr. W.A. Wijewardena, a career central banker. He retired from the central bank as his deputy governor in 2009. Since leaving the central bank, Dr. Wijewardena has functioned as an independent economic analyst, contributing to papers on very timely topics. Presently, Dr. Wijewardena serves as president of the government-approved non-state sector university business management school, adjunct faculty at Asian Institute of Technology. He is a member of the boards of studies of the Postgraduate Institute of Management and also of the University of Sri Jawadanapura. So I think we are going to have a very fruitful evening because we are having a very strong economist in Dr. Wijewardena to handle the subject. So let me now invite Dr. Wijewardena to deliver his memorial oration. Thank you.
Thanks, Aruna, and thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, Arul. Thanks, Nathan, for inviting me to deliver this 19th commemoration oration of late Mr. K. Sivaganathan. And I have a PowerPoint presentation here. I think I can.
You can share the screen, sir. We have made you the co-host.
Okay. I think that's okay now, no?
Yeah, we can see, sir. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm actually indeed honored to deliver this 19th commemoration oration of the late Mr. K. Sivaganathan. He was my friend, my colleague, and also my mentor. And he became a friend of mine in late 1989 when I was the Deputy Director of Economic Research in the Central Bank. And at that time, Mr. Sivaganathan was the Deputy General Manager at the Bank of Ceylon. And one day he visited me in the Central Bank along with Mr. K. Kadiravelu Pille, another Deputy General Manager at that time in the Bank of Ceylon, to make some clarifications about a unit trust that his bank was proposing to establish in Sri Lanka. And at that time, the unit trusts were not known to many. And as a result, Central Bank was a little hesitant to look at a proposal from Bank of Ceylon without further investigations. But what happened was he met us at the Central Bank, and Mr. Sivaganathan did such a wonderful job in explaining all to us that the need for establishing a unit trust in Sri Lanka at that time, because there was a necessity for people to move away from the banking sector to keep their money as deposits and have an alternative way to keep their money. And his speech was so convincing, and our team readily made the recommendation to the Monetary Board that the Bank of Ceylon should be permitted to establish the first ever unit trust in Sri Lanka, which was the C Bank Unit Trust. And that was the birth of the C Bank Unit Trust. And from that day onwards, Mr. Sivaganathan was one of my very close friends. Then he became my colleague, as Aruna had explained. He was handpicked by Governor S. Javadana as the advisor on banking and finance to the Monetary Board. Because of the wide experience he had in the field, and also the maturity that he had, and also he had a very strong social professional network among the bankers. And because of all these reasons, he was handpicked by Mr. S. Javadana, and he became the advisor to the Monetary Board, and he was serving in that capacity, and Mr. S. Javadana appointed him as the vice chairman of the Institute of Bankers of Sri Lanka. And at that time, I was the director of studies of the Institute of Bankers of Sri Lanka, and I had actually implemented several projects under the Central Bank Modernization Program with Mr. Sivaganathan as one of the partners. And I would be concentrating on two important projects here just to make the profile of the man about whom I am going to speak. And one project was the accreditation of the Institute of Bankers of Sri Lanka by the Chartered Institute of Bankers London, which was known at that time as the Institute of Financial Services, so IFS. And Mr. S. Javadana instructed us that we should seek accreditation from one of the leading professional institutes in the world because he wanted to take he wanted us to take the Institute of Bankers of Sri Lanka to the rest of the world and not confined to Sri Lanka. And we had various options to do that, but finally we zeroed on Chartered Institute of Bankers, or IFS, because Mr. Sivaganathan was a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Bankers, London, and also he had a good network with the management in the IFS when he was the manager of Bank of Ceylon, London branch. And also he was a very active member of the Colombo chapter of the Chartered Institute of Bankers. So we therefore started working on that, and then the whole project came under my purview when I was appointed the Deputy Governor in year 2000 and the Chairman of the Institute of Bankers of Sri Lanka, and Mr. Sivaganathan was my Vice Chairman. So we were working together. And I'll have to mention here, Mr. Sivaganathan shuttled between Colombo and London on several occasions at his own expense to do the negotiations with the Chartered Institute of Bankers on our behalf. That is because he used the opportunity to visit his family in London and to meet the officials of the Chartered Institute of Bankers London and to negotiate on our behalf. And finally, his negotiations were successful. But there were certain hiccups that we had to sort out because the Institute of Bankers of Sri Lanka at that time was not up to a world-renowned professional body. And the CIB had fielded a large number of audit teams to look at our examination system, our lecturers, our the internal administration, governance, and so forth. And they had found lots of weaknesses in us. And as a result, CIB actually helped us to improve them. And once we had improved them, and finally we were an institution that could be recognized by CIB as an equal institution, we entered into an agreement with CIB, and I had to visit London with Siva to sign the agreement with IFS, and that was how Siva was able to help the students who are passing out from the Institute of Bankers from year 2000 onward to get double qualifications. They get the qualification from IBSL as well as qualification from ISF London. And this particular program went on till year 2010, and at that time the IFS decided to withdraw from the arrangement because they had been granted university status by the Privy Council of the United Kingdom. And one of the conditions of giving that university status was that they had to give up all their relationship with other institutions with which they had accreditation programs. Therefore, the students who had passed out from IBSL from year 2000 to 2010 got the opportunity of getting double qualifications, and as a result, they were internationally accepted people. So that is one of the contributions Siva made to banking education in Sri Lanka. The other one was to the creation of the what is now known as Lanka Clear. Now, this was a project that both myself and Siva undertook under the Central Bank Modernization Program, again under the guidance of Mr. S. Jayawardena as governor. And the objective of the particular program was to divest the ownership of the automated clearinghouse, which had been set up by the Central Bank as far back as in 1985, to the stakeholders of the banking sector, who are the licensed commercial banks. And that was part of the modernization program because the Central Bank wanted to concentrate on the core objectives of the Central Bank, which were the maintenance of the economic and price stability and the financial system stability. But there were again large number of problems because a steering committee was set up under my chairmanship, where Mr. Sivaganathan was one of the leading members of the committee, and the other members were Mr. PDJ Fernando, who was the Director Information Technology at the Central Bank at that time, but later he retired as the Deputy Governor of the Central Bank. And then Mr. Justin Wickramasinghe, who was the manager the automated clearinghouse, and also late Mr. Arivansa, who was his assistant there. So we started working on the conversion of the automated clearinghouse to become one of the public-private partnerships in Sri Lanka, which was the first ever public-private partnership that had been floated in the country. And we had two issues. Issue number one was to get the banking community, which had been organized under the banner of the Sri Lanka Bank Association, on board. The other issue was that the Sri Lanka Banking Association did not want the staff that had been recruited by the central bank to ACH to continue with the new outfit that is going to be created. And therefore, they wanted us to clear ACH free of the existing staff. Now, these were two important issues, but Mr. Sivaganathan undertook to take to structure the legally structure the new outfit, and also get the concurrence of the Sri Lanka Banking Association to that, and also to negotiate with the Sri Lanka Banking Association, the Banks Association, to come on board on the new arrangement. My job was to handle the labor problem there, to take the staff back to central bank because there was objection to taking them back to central bank. Main reason was that the unions, which were about, say, 12 unions in the central bank, they objected it because the people who had been recruited to ACH by central bank in 1985 did not have the minimum entry qualification to central bank's non-staff grade, and therefore they were objecting that we are taking into central bank some less qualified people. And Mr. Sivaganathan was very successful in negotiating with SLBA. I can remember that he came up with draft after draft of the new arrangement. And when one draft was not acceptable to Monetary Board, and when it was amended to suit the requirements of the Monetary Board, it was not acceptable to the Sri Lanka Banking Association. So as a result, he had to do back and forth negotiation with Monetary Board and also with the SLBA. And finally, he was successful in floating a private company called the Lanka Clear Limited, which was jointly owned by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka and the banking licensed commercial banks of the country. And I had to do negotiations with the staff of the ACH, and I had to negotiate with the Monetary Board also to take them back to central bank. And we were successful in convincing that the unions that they should be taken into central bank because they were part and parcel of the central bank employees. And also we promised the staff that once they join the central bank, they would have a better career prospects, including foreign training. So as a result, they all decided to join the central bank, and the labor dispute was averted as a result of that. So we set up the Lanka Clear in year 2002 as a joint venture, the first ever public-private partnership that had been successfully implemented in Sri Lanka with the central bank as well as the banking community members. So in both cases, it was the wisdom, maturity, and the negotiation skills of Mr. Sivaganathan which did the trick. And after after we had floated the Lanka Clear, in 2002 we heard the news that Mr. Sivaganathan had suddenly died in London after brief illness. But at that time, he was the vice chairman of the Institute of Bankers of Sri Lanka as well as advisor to the Monetary Board. Because since the floating of Lanka Clear in 2002, there had been a number of achievements by Lanka Clear, and it has now become one of the leading technological institutions in the country, which has in fact introduced a number of innovations and novelties to Sri Lanka's payment system. And the latest one is the introduction of this Lanka Pay. through which the people can now pay small as well as big payments to government institutions and all other private sector institutions which should join LankaPay. And basically, the main target had been the government's revenue collecting institutions, the Inland Revenue, Customs, and also the Excise Department. And today, there are 4 banks which had already joined the LankaPay system, and other banks are in line to join it. Once all the commercial banks have joined, the payment of income tax to Inland Revenue Department or Customs Department or Excise Department, any payment would be just one click on the computer. And had Mr. Sivaganathan been alive today, he would have been the happiest man to witness all this. Now, in this background, I was invited to deliver the 10th memorial oration of the late Mr. K. Sivaganathan by the K. Sivaganathan Trust in year 2010. And the theme of my oration at that time was the Bank of the Future. And the Bank of the Future means that I had actually visualized that the future bank would be technologically driven, and it would be the development of this artificial intelligence and machine learning and intelligent machines, which would take over most of the routine jobs of banks. And I emphasize the fact that unless the banking community, the bankers at that time, agreed to accept the intelligent machines as co-workers, because the machines would do the same job which the bankers were doing much more efficiently and more effectively, and therefore the banking community had to accept them as co-workers. But to do that, the banking community had to put themselves on a continuous learning and professional development program. So I emphasize that fact in year 2010. And during the last 10-year time period, what had been predicted by me had come through now. Now, of course, with the cryptocurrencies available, at the same time, technologies like blockchain technology and artificial intelligence that has been developed, and also the machine learning, with all these factors, the banking sector has now gone far away from what the banking sector was during Mr. K. Sivaganathan's time to a new era. And therefore, for my oration today, I have chosen a very apt theme. That theme is the challenges of banks in the new normal in the post-COVID-19 revival. Now, what we mean by new normal is that after the post-COVID-19, lots of the interpersonal relationships had been completely disrupted because of the healthcare requirements. Now, people cannot now get together. They cannot visit institutions in the same way they had done in the past. And at the same time, there are lots of health requirements which they have to oblige, they have to fulfill in order to have social relationships. In the new normal, the banker has been distanced from the customers. And at the same time, the economies had been completely disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic. 2 reasons. Reason number 1 is that the economies had been locked down for long periods, and at the same time, the supply chains in all the economies, in all the sectors, agriculture, services, and also industry, had been disrupted. So the revival of the economies by all these by the systems requires the system to take action under the new normal. But of course, we now find that with the present state of the COVID-19 pandemic, it's going to be with us for many more years. And as a result, the new normal has now become the permanent normal. So what the bankers challenge today is to work under the permanent normal, how they should meet the requirements. But at the same time, the economies had been completely devastated by the COVID-19 pandemic, and Sri Lanka is not an exception. The global economy had, in year 2020, had experienced negative economic growth. Similarly, the Sri Lanka economy also had experienced a negative economic growth, and the World Bank and ADB had put the economic contraction in Sri Lanka economy at around 6%, so that the size of the economy will be smaller by 6% year 2020. And at the same time, we have another problem because the economic recovery, whether it would become a quick economic recovery like a V-shaped economic recovery, or is it a prolonged economic recovery like a W-shaped economic recovery. Now, with the successful handling of the first wave of COVID-19 pandemic in Sri Lanka, everybody had the hope that it would be a V-shaped quick recovery for Sri Lanka. But once the second wave hit Sri Lanka, now it appears that it will be a prolonged W-shaped economic recovery. And the for Sri Lanka to get into the normal growth path, at which the economic growth rate would be around 7% per annum, according to the central bank's projections as well as the projections by the World Bank, it might take at least another 3 to 4 year time period. So what it means is we will not become a normal economy until year 2025. Now, this is the challenge faced by bankers in Sri Lanka today to how they could help Sri Lanka economy revive under these conditions, because it's a very important thing. Then we have to keep in our mind another important caveat here. That caveat is that the politicians as well as some section in the civil society expects banks to take the full responsibility for the economic revival, which the banks cannot do. The main reason is banks have only one weapon, and that weapon is a nominal weapon. What I mean by a nominal weapon is they can actually give credit, and credit is simply a notion in the minds of the people, and there's no any real existence for credit. And the real existence is only with things like, say, rice, coconut, mangoes, clothes, and so forth, because they can be consumed by the consumers as a final consumption product, or they can be used as a raw material for producing a further product. But the credit, the main product of the banking sector, which we call the credit or loans, is cannot be consumed as a final product. If we want to consume it, we have to convert it into a real product in order to consume them. For example, if I get a loan from the bank for a house, I cannot live in the loan. For me to have the house, I have to convert the loan proceeds into a house, and then it will become a real product. So banks have a nominal instrument, and with that nominal instrument, the bank cannot take the full responsibility for economic revival, though the politicians and also the civil society leaders expect banks to take the full responsibility. But bank can certainly assist, facilitate, and help economic revival, and let us see how they can do it. One is that they have to help the country to build up the disrupted supply chain. Because when you take the supply chain, it starts from the input suppliers and ends with the final consumers. And in the process, there are a large number of the participants who would participate in the supply chain. And the banks are one of the important participants by providing the credit and also provided necessary funds. But in the case of the supply chain, banks are not the only participant. They are only one participant among many. But if we remove bankers from that particular role, the entire supply chain would collapse. So that is why the bank's contributions are very important in reviving the supply chain. For this purpose, we have to now look at two aspects. One is the how the bank should give credit to lead these credit flows to the economy, and what are the constraints that they are having, what are the problems they are facing. Number one is that the authorities appear to be in the belief that the problem in the economy is a liquidity problem. If you provide liquidity to people in Sri Lanka, they think that the entire economy can come back to its normal level. But actually, it is not only a liquidity problem, it is the structural problem. That is because unless we overcome and we resolve the structural issues, simply because by inundating the economy with liquidity will not serve anything. So bankers will have to work together with the real economic agents in order to provide this particular facility. If the real economic agents do not do their job well, what happens is the liquidity that is created by the banks will simply end up as additional money in the hands of people, and that additional money will create demand for goods and services. If the supply of goods and services would not increase in the immediate future, what would happen is that there would be an outflow of money from Sri Lanka by way of imports and foreign travel and so forth. And also there will be an acceleration of the prices within the country, which would eventually lead to depreciation of the exchange rate. Therefore, it will lead to a number of macroeconomic issues unless the real sector doesn't work properly along with the banking sector. But here, I have come across two important issues about which I would like to draw your attention today. One important issue is that what is known as this small and medium enterprise sector, SME sector, and also the two sectors below that. One is called the micro sector, the other one called the MESA sector. Now, in between micro and SME, we have another sector called MESA sector, which is neither micro nor SME. For example, all the sideway tailors whom we have, the lathe machine operators we have, the vegetable and fruit sellers we have, the fishmongers we have, small businessmen we have, they are called the MESA sector because they are above the micro level, but at the same time, they are below the SME sector. But the authorities appear to be concentrating on the requirements of the SME sector, but not the MESA sector. So as a result, a large number of participants in the MESA sector had not been able to get necessary funding facilities. And one reason has been that when they appear before a bank, the bank always look at the report sent by the Credit Information Bureau or CRIB. And if there's an adverse report submitted by the Credit Information Bureau, that particular person is denied of a credit facility. So as a result, a large number of people have not been able to get the required funding for this purpose. I have documented a number of cases involving this particular sector, and I have actually 3 of such cases I have already published also in my weekly column in the Daily FT. And I would like to draw your attention to these 3 cases to enable you to understand the magnitude and the size of the problem. One case is relating to a fish trader who was running a fish stall by the side of a main highway. And this man had been buying fish from the Paligoda wholesale fish market. He has to go there early in the morning at about 2 o'clock in the morning with money, because the transactions at the wholesale fish market at Paligoda is on a cash basis. He has to pay money immediately. He brings the fish. Normally he buys about, say, 200,000 rupee worth of fish. And once they are brought to his fish stall, some of the retail customers like us, we pay then and there, we buy it. But most of his customers have been the hospitals around his fish stall, and also some of the hotels around his stall. And those people pay money after 1 month, because most of these people, the customers, when they make the payment, normally they use the tactic of giving him a post-dated check, which he has to present to the bank for payment, and the particular customer has to supply his account with the required money at that time. And because of the COVID-19 pandemic, most of these checks actually got returned, and he had some of these checks he had sold to the people who are buying checks in the market at a discount, at 6% discount. For 100 rupee check, he get 94 rupees, but still it was worth. But if the check returns unpaid, he has to return that money to the person who had bought the check. He had approached several banks to get a line of credit, and he had been denied. Several reasons. Reason number 1 is the banks had not assessed him properly. Number 2, the CRIB report had not been favorable for him. And as a result, he was denied of credit, and but he needs money now because his cash flow had been very badly affected. When he was, thinking of what he should do, a young man had approached him on a motorbike and discussed with him his financial problem and suggested to him they can support him. And that particular man has offered him, he can give the required amount of money immediately, then and there, without looking at his, financial accounts or anything. But the interest rate per month is 10%, and he has to pay the full amount in 100 days times in daily installments. And the man was destitute, and he had agreed to it. And he spoke to the person at the end of the financial arrangement on the telephone. They agreed on it. Within 15 minutes time, the young man on the bicycle had delivered ₹500,000 to his fish stall. Now, this is the efficiency of the informal money market. And but what happens is now he has to pay interest and the daily payment. He didn't make enough money. And when I met him second time, he had actually been indebted from ₹500,000 to ₹1.5 million. And last week, when I passed through his fish stall, he was no more there. When I made inquiries, nobody knew where he was. He had disappeared. So this is the pathetic story of a fishmonger. Then there is another pathetic story of a tailor who was running a small tailoring shop. He had actually stitched the uniforms for school children, but because of the COVID-19 pandemic, parents had not been able to take the delivery of the uniforms he had stitched because they didn't have money. So he had a cash flow problem. And at the same time, he wanted to expand his business also. He wanted to introduce 2 sewing machines and employ 2 other people and expand his business. When he approached the banks, several banks, when he approached, he had been rejected by these banks mainly because he had signed as a guarantor to one of the persons who had who had leased a 3-wheeler from a leasing company, and that person had defaulted his payments, and as a result, his name appears on the CRIB register as a man who has defaulted the loan. So as a result, he is a persona non grata for the banking sector. And when he was, wondering what he should do, again, he was approached by this young man on the motorbike, and he also went into the same financial arrangement. Now, after he got the first line of credit, now he is in the third line of credit and he is deeply indebted. Then I know another story of a fruit seller by the side of the road. He also had the same experience. He was not accommodated by the banks, and as a result, he had become one of the persons who had been indebted to these informal money lenders. I don't here say that informal money lenders are bad. They are doing a great job, because if they don't supply this particular funding at the required time, these people would have died long time ago. So therefore, they are a necessity. But what matters here is that the banking sector will have to amend their system of credit evaluation, delivery of credit evaluation, and they will have to emulate the informal money lenders and eliminate them competitively rather than by laws or any other thing. So the banking sector has to now take a huge charge, because in Sri Lanka, the SME, micro and MESA sector constitutes about, say, 60% of the total economy. And if that sector doesn't come back to, is not revived, total economy cannot revive at all. And one of the reasons why this particular problem has arisen is that the banks have been over-relying on the CRIB reports. Now, I was the founding general manager of the CRIB in 1990, and I know the objective of CRIB was not to deny any loan to any particular customer. The objective of CRIB was to eliminate what was known as the asymmetric information that was prevalent among the banking sector at that time. The asymmetric information is that the borrower knows everything about him, but the banker doesn't know. Banker knows only what the borrower may have revealed it to him. So as a result, the borrowers had the advantage of defaulting and shifting from one bank to another, and in the process, defaulting to all the banks. So to streamline the information flow among the bankers about the borrowers of the country, the Credit Information Bureau was set up. And the Credit Information Bureau's information set is simply a pointer, and it's not a deciding factor either to approve or disapprove a loan to a customer. But what has happened today is that the banks have over-relied on the reports submitted by the Credit Information Bureau and used those reports as an excuse not to accommodate the financial requirements of customers, which was not the objective and the intended purpose of the Credit Information Bureau. What the banks should do is to, instead of rejecting loans to people whose names are there, banks must in fact make an assessment of their own about the credit worthiness of the borrower, and if there's a risk involving accommodating any particular customer, they can mitigate that risk by charging a high interest rate from that customer. Rather than charging a single interest rate, banks will have to charge multiple interest rates from the customers. Now, about these informal money lenders, I made inquiries how they would make the inquiry about the customers. Now, they don't actually do this financial or credit analysis as the bankers do. And what they do is actually being done in their heads. And that is being done by adopting a tactic called eardrum and eyeball test. What you mean by eardrum test is that they listen to people around the person and see what is he doing, and the eyeball is they watch the person very closely with their own eyes how they is performing. And if the person passes the test, then only that the young man on the motorbike will approach him with a credit proposal. Now, bankers also will have to come back to this particular type of technique of adopting and assessing a borrower. And this is a very important thing in the present era of banking technology, where we are using intelligent machines and also artificial intelligence, because the machine cannot do it, but the bankers can do it. That is where the bankers can keep their jobs, by being smarter than machines and by using information available to him in order to assess the credit worthiness of borrowers, and the bankers will have to come up with a more acceptable thing. And these are the two factors that we have to keep in mind. But one important development that is taking place today is the introduction of this open banking, or the use of this big data by the bankers, because most of the countries in the United Kingdom, European Union, Singapore, they have already adopted the open banking system. And India is now actively pursuing how open banking system should be introduced there. What is meant by open banking system is that the banks are sitting on a vast array of information, which is not shared even among the branches within the bank. Because, for example, what is known in the savings department in the bank is not known in the marketing department. What is known in the loan department in the bank is not made available to the product development department. So likewise, within the bank also, the data are not being shared, but among the banks also, data are not being shared. For that purpose, now they have introduced the new system called open banking. Open banking is facilitated by what is known as this application programmer interface developers, API developers. And what API developers do is they collect the information wholesale from the banking sector and assess that information, analyze that information, and make available that information to all other banks or any other person who wants it. But for that purpose, we have to amend the secrecy laws that we have in Sri Lanka, permitting APIs to access the data inside the bank and use them under control by a regulatory authority like the central bank. Now, these are the future challenges of banks to revive the COVID-19 affected economy. And I'll stop here. And there is, I think, panel discussion. And at the panel discussion, I can provide additional information about it. So thank you very much for inviting me to deliver this 19th commemoration oration of
Thank you very much, Dr. Wijewardena, for most elaborative information on the economy and how banks could take up the challenges in this new era, which is the permanent normal, as you indicated. And with that, we shall start a panel discussion. And I invite our president, Arno Fernando, our past president, which is Sachi Kandambi, Senior Deputy General Manager of Sampath Bank, and of course from the family of Mr. Sivaganathan, Nathan, to join us for a panel discussion, and Dr. Wijewardena, so that we can take a few of the boiling questions that may come up from the forum, or we could discuss further areas on how the economy, or what are the new areas that we should be looking for as bankers in the post-pandemic going forward. So welcome the panelists to this session. To start off with some of the questions that Dr. Wijewardena did speak of, he was talking about the small and medium and the micro sector areas, which is, I think, a much more viable area in the wholesale market or the retail market or the micro side, where many of the bankers have not looked into or gone into deep of financing private sector credit. In this context, I would like to ask Shashi, is there any views of from a commercial banking point, how we could reach out to such areas to broad-base sector in order to help, as Dr. Wijewardena cited a few examples also, the fish trader, the tailor, and also, so how we could support such areas in the microfinance and the new area, which is the MASA area, which is something important for bankers in this area. Can you comment on a few things, Shashi, on this?
Yes, thanks, Jeremy. As Mr. Wijewardena, Dr. Wijewardena said, that this is banks also recognize that SME, MSME, and the MESA sector is one of the key areas, and it contributes to, as Doctor said, about 60% of the GDP. So that says how important it is to a country of our size. And also it's important to the bank, because if you look at banks, we do have a huge network other than the Western province where most of the corporates are. Rest of the business is basically outskirts of Colombo. So that is basically, if you look at the businesses, it is SME and below. But having said that, that is also a segment which is, I would say, high risk. Even in a pandemic situation, we saw with a slight volatility, those are the borrowers who will get into the risk because they have only very shallow pockets. But we understand that's an area that we need to support. So banks need to set up the risk framework properly. And I know even India, Thailand cases also, they have, if you want to get into the SME sector, you have to get your right risk framework, which banks do have. And even today, a bank of our size also, we have separate specialists sitting in various sub-officers in various provinces looking at these industries and supporting customers. Now, other than the risk framework, I would also like to mention, as banks, we do support not only by just giving loans. It's just plain vanilla lending is not enough for the growth of the SME sector. They also need seed capital, which actually, to tell you honestly, banks, the commercial banks do not provide. And they need capital is a constraint. As Dr. Wijewardena said, when there's no capital, that is where they go into these loan sharks and they get basically kill their entrepreneurship then and there, because it's expensive, one, and also it's very demanding. So these private lenders, informal lenders, not like banks, do not give enough sufficient time for them to pay. I mean, there's no hand holding for them in a difficulty. Now, that is the number one the SME faces. Banks, when you take, as Dr. Wijewardena said, when there is a crib, yes, we look at carefully. But having said that, there are certain cases we do help. On the positive side, I would say, we do advise SME customers and MSE customers for marketing, for accounting. So therefore, what I'm saying is banks do add value other than just giving money to SMEs. One good example is we do conduct training. You may have seen in the newspapers also. Most of the banks, regional level, they have training sessions for SMEs where we educate them on how to do marketing, how to do their accountancy, how to do sales, how even to do a project report that is bankable so that they can walk into a bank and ask for facilities. Another thing that we do is we also conduct seminars because certain SMEs do imports and they do have certain manufacturing for export market. I myself have participated and conducted few sessions where we get down export development board, then import controllers, and in fact even the IRD, that is Inland Revenue, so that knowledge is shared among these up and coming entrepreneurs, SME sector, MSME sector, supporting them to do a startup or to improve their businesses going into the next scale. That's number 2. And what you have seen is recently, I mean, it started popularizing because of the COVID, these digital platforms that the banks do provide, where today, if I'm say a pottery manufacturer, I don't have to go around the country to do the sales. We do provide them the websites so that you can do online sales. And banks do provide portals to do payment gateways. So there are certain initiatives that the banks have taken to grow this sector, because we understand this is a sector that we need to grow for the benefit of the country, and also it's a win-win for the banks also. I must say that is where the business is for us. As Dr. Wijewardena said, these are the customers that as much as that we invest in them, there is a cost of operating a SME rather than a corporate, for which that we also charge them a fee. So therefore, from the bank side also, it is a win-win situation when the SMEs grow. Jeremy, I believe I answered your question.
Yes, thank
So
you.
this is how the bank in the system is geared to cater to SME development.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much. One area that just to re-clarify, Dr. Wijewardena, you talked about open banking systems. Now, if the Sri Lankan market needs to see financial inclusivity into the micro and the SME and the MASA areas, what are in your view, what sort of things that the bank should be adapting to reach out in that manner?
Well, the financial inclusivity has been the goal of, I think, all banking regulators throughout the world, including the United States. Even in that country, you can remember Bill Clinton wanted Professor Yunus to come over to USA and provide the facilities for financial inclusivity, because most of the countries, the financial inclusivity is not there. But financial inclusivity is not necessarily about getting a bank account. It is actually getting the financial services from the financial services industry. Now, banks are only one particular institution in the financial service industry. There are various other institutions like the payment institutions, microfinance institutions, insurance institutions, which also provide financial services. So inclusivity in financial services is that we will first get the customers to open a bank account, which is now very easy in Sri Lanka. If you take the National Savings Bank, the whole of the Sri Lanka's population is only 22 million, but National Savings Bank has about 26 million accounts there. So which means they have, I think, for one person, more than one account. And but it doesn't mean that they are financially included. to get them financially included, as Sashi had very clearly said, they must get the financial knowledge as well. That financial knowledge means how to save money, number one, then how to spend money, number two, then how to get the banking financial services from those financial institutions, number three, number four, how they can use the insurance services in order to meet a situation like, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic, finally the payment services in the country, plus they must actually be good at assessing the risk involved. Now today, I think now we go by this income standard for categorizing and classifying the poor people in the country. But the poor people have been classified as defined today, not as the people who get lower income. Poor people are the people who cannot assess the risk that they are faced. In that respect, Jeremy, I am also a poor man if I don't know how to assess my risk. So that part of the knowledge has to be imparted to these people, and what the bank should do is now, as they are corporate, I think, responsibility initiatives, they may set up, you know, separate arms, or they may use the Institute of Bankers of Sri Lanka in order to disseminate this particular knowledge among the people, or they may team up with the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, because Central Bank of Sri Lanka is now pretty much on financial inclusivity, and where we would be improving the financial literacy of the people, how they must, you know, save money and so forth. Because I have a good experience about this, Jeremy, because I ran the first ever microfinance power television project in Sri Lanka called the Small Farmers and the Landless Credit Project when I was the Director of Rural Credit in the Central Bank. And because we followed the modified Grameen Bank approach of, you know, establishing the self-help groups and then converting those self-help groups to bankable individuals and so forth. And one of the requirements was that those poor people whom we had taken, they had to save a minimum of 5 rupees in their account with the Regional Rural Development Bank per week. And then they came back to us and said, we don't earn even 5 rupees, and how can you expect us to save 5 rupees? Then we had to tell them there are various ways of, you know, the wastage in their houses. If they eat, you know, chew the beetle, if they do it, you know, 3 times a day, they can reduce it to 2 times. If they drink, they can take just, you know, little sip rather than taking a bottle. And there are lots of, you know, resources that are sitting around their houses, like the coconut shells, paper, tin, and so forth, which can be collected and sold in the market. And at the same time, they can earn, save money by buying wholesale, getting together and buy at wholesale the school's children books, and then the rice and sugar and so forth, so that they can save money. And with that, they could definitely they can save 5 rupees, but they did. And an important element in this Small Farmers and Landless Credit Project was money was accumulating as an insurance fund in the account in the Regional Rural Development Bank. And when they faced a catastrophe like the COVID-19 pandemic, or let's say a flood or a drought, that money helped them to go through the particular thing. So this is what is most important, because the education of the people in Sri Lanka, in order to look after themselves, it's a must, and the banks cannot take the full responsibility for that. That should come from the schools, from the temples, the religious institutions, and also from the civic leaders and so forth. And this is one of the most important things that we have to do. I can share another story about, you know, the things that I had learned when I was at the Central Bank. The man about whom I am speaking was one of the billionaires of Sri Lanka. And he had started, you know, his life as a grease monkey in the cycle bazaar in Borelle, where his job was to, you know, clean the bicycles that are being brought there. This is immediately after the wartime. And the fellow had seen that the people were, you know, putting private buses on the road. So he got a loan from one of the finance companies at that time, and he put a bus. He had, in fact, divided his income into 6 parts a day. One part was for him to buy the fuel for the next day. Second part was to repay the loan to the finance company. Third part was to buy another bus. Fourth part was to pay the salaries of the employees that he has. Fifth part was for the maintenance of the bus, and the sixth part was his family income. So what he has done is he has only consumed only 1/6 of his income. Now this is very important because even in according to the Singalowada Sutra of the Buddha, Buddha has said that we must consume only 1/4 of our income. The balance he had advised the Singalowada Putra that 25% should be saved, another 25% should be used for further income generating things. The balance 25% should be used to donate money to relatives and the holy people, and the last 25% only he should consume. Now, the problem in Sri Lanka today is that we consume about, say, 82% of our income on average. So that is where the problem arises. So these are the things that we do, but this should come from the austerity, the thrift, and the way, the way that we should look at, at the life. And the man about whom the story that was, it was related to me by his grandson, and that particular person had run the largest private bus company in Sri Lanka by the time it was nationalized in 1959 by Bandaranaike government.
Thank you, Doctor. With that, so another area that we did recently see is the policy rates being brought down to a stable rate in order to advocate much more economic growth. Now, any thoughts of that? What else can be made use of by the stable policy rates? Is it going to be helping full growth of economy, or is it going to help only one sector of the economy? What's your thoughts on that, Dr. Vijay?
Well, of course, first of all, I'll have to say that entire policy rate reduction had been based on a wrong assumption. Wrong assumption is that the interest rate is the main cost of an investor, of a businessman, which is not correct. If you take a farmer, the main cost of a farmer is the preparation of the land, buying seed paddy, buying fertilizer, and the interest cost is only, we had calculated when we were in the central bank, it's about, say, 5% of the total cost that the farmer has to incur. Similarly, in the case of other businesses also, because interest is a cost, but it's not the main cost. But the main cost of a country in order to revive an economy is you have to remove the structural problems that we are having. Without removing the structural problems, if you cut down the interest rates, it will actually function as a double-edged sword. Everybody knows if you have a double-edged sword, if you wave it this side, it cuts you. If you wave it the other side, it cuts you. So therefore, you get cut, either way. So this is what has actually happened today, because one problem with the banking sector today, they are inundated with the surplus of money, and savers are not willing to save their money with the banking sector. Instead, they are going behind all kinds of these the speculative type of investments in the share market, and also providing money to these informal money lenders, and various type of income earning things they are going. Basically, they are going even for pyramid schemes, and the pyramid schemes are pretty much in operation, which has become one of the biggest threat to commercial banking sector in the country. So therefore, the reduction of the interest rate should be done very carefully. The central bank has done its job. The banking sector has also done its job, but without the removal of the structural problems that we are facing, mere supplying people with credit will not revive an economy. And also, we have already seen the low interest rate structure has resulted in number one, the government is unable to now get the money, borrow money, not only from the international market. Even from the domestic market, it cannot borrow. When it issues treasury bills or treasury bonds in a particular issue, the amount that is being subscribed is about, say, the fraction of what they have offered in the market. And at the same time, Sri Lanka rupee has come under pressure for depreciation. And all these problems are there because the reduction of the interest rate beyond what it should have been has actually acted as an explosive element in the market today. You have to, Jeremy, you have to unmute yourself. You have to unmute, Jeremy. We can't hear you.
In the recently, we did see that again, central bank was making a decision on the foreign exchange, curtailment of the foreign exchange and forward contracts and all for especially the importers. And on the other side, making it mandatory for exporters to make conversion of the earnings that they bring into the country. So will that make a long-term sustainability for the economic growth by doing those things, or any other alternate ways are available that they could circumvent and enhance the economic growth?
Well, my first response to your question, Jeremy, is that they have done what they should have done last as the first thing. What should have been done as the last resort has been done as the first resort. Because in fact, all of us have to admit the fact that Sri Lanka is going through a very difficult period today. And our foreign exchange situation had been deteriorating, not mainly due to this COVID-19 pandemic, but even prior to that, from around, say, year 2013, the Sri Lanka was having this particular economic problem in the country. And exports were not growing at the rate which we had expected. We had built up the foreign resource by borrowing, and we had been boasting about the size of the foreign resource without looking at the quality of the reserves. And rupee had been subject to depreciation continuously. Sri Lanka's inflation rate had been above the world inflation rate, and as a result, our real exchange rate had been appreciating, which needed the correction. So all these factors are there. And on top of that, once the economy was hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, they had actually, I think, overreacted. My assessment is they have overreacted rather than doing the proper thing. The proper thing would have been, trying to get credit arrangement with the International Monetary Fund. But instead of the present government, what it has done is it is actually making slogans that they are not going behind the International Monetary Fund. They know the mantra to revive the economy, and that mantra will work according to them. And they have plan. If the plan A fails, they have plan B, and if the plan B fails, they have plan C. So all types of things are being fed to us. But the world community has not been accepting it. And you'd have noted the rating agencies have downgraded Sri Lanka. And the hilarious thing, Jeremy, is that Citibank, Barclays Bank, and the Standard Chartered Bank had been the issue managers for the Sri Lanka government's international sovereign bonds in the past. And the two banks, the Barclays and the Standard Chartered, a week ago, had actually classified the Sri Lanka government's ISBs as downweight, meaning that the holders of the ISB should reduce the exposure. Now, coming from an issue manager, that piece of advice to existing investors is a good thing. That means what we are doing is not being accepted by the world community. But if you look at the import control that we have introduced, will not serve Sri Lanka to attain this economic revival in the long run, because imports are needed in order to produce goods in Sri Lanka. Now, good example is if you have a tire factory today in Sri Lanka, you can export tires and earn foreign exchange. But for you to produce tire in Sri Lanka, you have to import the rubber sheet from Vietnam, latex from Vietnam, steel from foreign countries, and then carbon from foreign countries. Carbon is one of the important ingredients coming from the petrochemical industry. We don't produce it. So the value addition in the tire factory is simply about say 20% of a tire. But we can make money, Jeremy, by increasing the volume. Now, this is a good example of the iPhone. Now, iPhone, though it is assembled in China, the Chinese value addition about $10 per iPhone. The balance, about say $990 is being earned in the rest of the world. Some 470 odd production units located in 47 countries, spanned all over the world. But China makes money because the big volumes, 2 to 3 billion units of iPhones are produced, and the $10 per unit means they are making about say 10 to 20, 30 billion US dollars. So Sri Lanka also should do that. Sri Lanka, I don't say that Sri Lanka should not, use imported raw materials. We have to use imported raw materials, but we have to expand the scale of operations to such a way and produce such a quality good so that like the iPhone, we must be able to make money out of the volume that we produce.
Right. Thank you, Doctor. I think just another question I would pose to Nathan. Now, being in the private sector, I think how would you see the current situations and the new normals from a private sector per se? And what do you think from the banking area? Is there something else that expected to come into the private sector, or is the private sector self-sufficient in funding their own requirements for the development of the country?
Thanks, Jeremy, for sharing that. I think, as Sashi said, if I start from the bottom of the pyramid, we need to encourage many more startups to begin in their journey in Sri Lanka. Through Hatch, we've been able to achieve that quite well. But the funding gap is still there. And one of the key things is seed capital always requires some form of collateral. And most of these startups don't have any collateral, and every single bank, other than your blood type, they want everything else as collateral before they start lending money. So that's one of the biggest issues that we see. The second piece of it is the different type of lending is also needs to change. The Sri Lanka doesn't have a good act for funds. There isn't any legal structures today for venture capital or private equity funds to be established in Sri Lanka. So that's probably the second level of funding that's needed in this country to create another method of funding for these opportunities. What we see from the SME sector is that the export markets are still going to be very strong. Sri Lanka, positively or negatively, the dollar has always made Sri Lanka quite competitive in the pricing of product. And specifically, if you take the apparel industry, they still are, the cost of production is still lower than our sister countries, or even China, Vietnam as well. I think the tire industry is another one, and the seafood industry is certainly another one that definitely would expand in this country, specifically in this current market conditions, where buyers are looking for various different countries to produce and do not want to expose them to one country itself. In terms of the other areas which there's opportunities, I would say the service sector is still a great opportunity, especially in the IT industry. I feel that we can do a lot more than the current $1 billion that we export. The service sector still has a long way to go to get to those higher numbers that we can look at. And internally looking, the tourism sector is a key part of the life in Sri Lanka, and due to the Easter bombing and followed by COVID, the last 24 months have been really difficult for the country in the tourism sector. But we still see that the tourism sector is an opportunity for investors as well as local entrepreneurs to get into and having different types of experiences delivered through the country's luxurious properties, as well as the different sites. So these are some of the sectors through, and the banking sector, I think Mr. Vijayawardena clearly shared that one thing that is bank can only lend the money. The other thing is executing and implementing. advisory role for SME rather than just a sales role. A lot of the banks do not play that advisory role, and I think that's another gap that could be helped through the banking sector as well.
Right. Thank you, Nathan. With this, I think we have almost come to the end. I would like to pose one question to Aruna, President, to ask what are the views from APB's side and how could APB come up forward in this new normal? What are the things that have been done for the members or what the banking sector? Any thoughts on those? Aruna can elaborate on some things that APB has been doing for its members? Mike is
Sorry. Thanks, Jeremy. I think we never imagined that we will be running into a time like this. To my memory, the longest curfews were there when we joined banks way back in late 80s. And still, I remember as a new recruit at the bank, we never stayed behind at home, whether it's curfew or not. Still, we ended up at the bank premises. So, but here now, people are working from home and we are not having physical meetings. So, getting adjusted to the new norm was initially a bit difficult. But then the technology came in to help. I think we were not having this Zoom technology like this 1 year ago. So things have changed, Jeremy. I think when we were schooling, I remember we were watching Blake 7, and when some of those people were using their researchers to talk to the guys up there in the spaceship, it was just magic to us. Now, even small children are having these smartwatches and they can communicate. So, and in late 80s, in early 90s, we never imagined that there will be a thing called all this internet, that sort of thing. So with this development of the technology, things had become much more easier. So this will prevail. Now, in the case of APB also, we just converted having our council meetings onto the Zoom platforms. And I think we had been more active than the previous years where your committee managed to have more webinars. It was very convenient for the people also to attend at their own convenience. They were logging in from various places and joining the conversations. So in the future too, this will prevail. I don't think this Zoom part, the virtual part of meetings will go off. That's going to be there for forever maybe, or at least for the next 5-10 years. So maybe there can be much better technologies also in the future, because you just can't imagine. I don't think that we should think that things will remain static. In another 10-15 years, we will be dealing with some different technologies altogether. So in APB's case, we had been diverting into Zoom meetings, or hybrid meetings. And in the case of development of our members, we are presently talking to SEMA Sri Lanka, where we want to tie up with them on a strategic partnership to offer, then again, online courses, where at the convenience, at their own homes, our members and even the other bankers can access the SEMA Sri Lanka, some of their courses, and complete those and get familiar with the new technologies, as very correctly mentioned by Dr. Wijewardena earlier in the presentation. So they have all the course content. So those are the things that we are looking into, and in another few days' time, we are trying to we are planning to have a research symposium also, first of its own kind, because we could not have the conventional normal annual convention last year. So it's going to be a research symposium which will happen on the 22nd and at Colombo Hilton. So we expect a lot of bankers to be there. So with that, I think we just need to get adjusted to the new situation, and life has to move on.
Right. Thank you very much, Aruna. Thank you very much, all the panelists, for your views on the areas. With this, we will move on to the next section, and I invite Nathan from the Sivaganathan Trust to speak a few words about the trust and about his late father, because this is a co-opted function which we hold with APB as well with the K. Sivaganathan Trust Fund. And over to you, Nathan, for a few comments.
Thank you, Jeremy. Distinguished guests through Zoom, Dr. Vijayawardena, Mr. Fernando, as well as Mrs. Jazim and Jeremy. Thank you very much for taking your time and being part of the oration. Today is Mahashivaratri, literally translates as a great night for Shiva. It's a Hindu festival celebrated annually in honor of God Shiva. It is apt that we are celebrating the life of my father, fondly known as Siva and named after Lord Shiva as well. We thank you for your presence, Dr. Vijayawardena. As always, your speeches are amazing and insightful. Thank you for sharing some of the memories of your interaction with my father, some of which none of us knew. Your speech, which is very apt in this current condition of the country and the world, as you suggest, the permanent norm is the new norm now. Revival of the economy would be 4 to 5 years from today. Banks are given the worst task possible when the economy is down, and just giving credit will not be the fix overall. And your sentiments around this is extremely apt and meaningful in the ways that we need to develop the economy. The banking sector is going through some turbulent conditions at present, and things such as the debt payment, including the rising of the non-performing loans, not to forget the impact of COVID and the moratoriums that were extended as well. So this is a time where bankers who are listening in will have to step up and support businesses around the country. These times are no different to the times of our forefathers who went through many ups and downs in the economy, global challenges, colonization, and the war. These were the times that leaders stood up and made a difference. My father was renowned for this, a simple man with simple ideas where relationship, hard work, perseverance mattered most to getting things done. His love for banking sector started with a need for a job, eventually to a career in banking that spanned for 43 years in one single entity till retirement. These types of commitments in the millennial world is unheard of. These were the reasons he wanted to ensure that people had the opportunity for qualifications in banking and finance. Hence, the K. Sivaganathan Memorial Trust was set up to recognize the virtues of perseverance and hard work. On behalf of my mother, the trustees of the K. Sivaganathan Trust and family, I want to end up by congratulating all the past participants and the recipients of awards. Unfortunately, this year, due to COVID, we were not able to meet physically, and some of the exams were not conducted. But we are pleased that the family has extended to 1,500 who have received the prestigious award over the last 19 years. And I'm wishing that all of them have got great careers in banking or finance. Even though we're having this through Zoom, it's my duty to thank the Bank of Ceylon, who've always been a great host for the event for the last 18 years. The APB and IBSL for their continuous support, KPMG for their support in audit, and most importantly, the trustees and the audience who have made it every year here. Thank you very much, and I hand it back to.
Thank you, Nathan. I think we have now come to the end of the session, and it's my duty on behalf of the APB and the Continuous Professional Development Committee to pay our sincere thank you, Dr. Vijayawardena, for readily accepting our invitation for this oration. I think this is an annual oration and in remembrance that we do for a great banker who has kept a big footstep of whatever he has done, and so that he's been remembered annually by the bankers. And this program has been taken over by APB with the Sivaganathan Trust to have it annually. So thank you very much, Dr. Vijayawardena, for accepting our invitation and giving a very emanative elaborative discussion on the economy and what are we could as bankers take in this challenging situation. And of course, to the family members of the K. Sivaganathan Trust for also being with us today and all being in the organizing. Arul and Nathan, thank you very much for being with the organizing committee to do this a successful event. And of course, this event would have not been a success if not for the pillars behind the APAB, the council and the council of advisors, who have always been a strength in having this event annually. And of course, to my committee members, the continuous professional development committee members who have supported me in making this event a reality. And of course, although we did have a physical event, we have been able to still meet up on a online platform, which is going to be the permanent, as Dr. Wijewardene said, the permanent norm now by communications or meetings or meetups would be more virtual. So thank you very much for everybody for your patient hearing and all the participants who did sign in for this event. Thank you very much and wish you a great evening and enjoy your day. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much, Jeremy. Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Doctor.
Thanks, Dr. Wijewardene.
It
Thanks,
was my
Shashi.
pleasure. Thanks for inviting me to deliver this oration.
Okay, we'll hope to see you on many more occasions on the APB events in the coming few weeks on the APB Research Forum. Also, we will be seeing you and being able to hear from some of the real new areas, what your thoughts of sharing with the bankers. Thank you. And
I am at your disposal, Jeremy.
okay, sir, thank you very much. That's a great pleasure to APB for doing that. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.